Look closely at this 1880 masterpiece by Scottish painter Gourlay Steell. At first glance, it looks like a scene of standard medieval tragedy. But the deeper you look into the shadows of this room, the more you realize you aren't looking at a simple historical fable. You're looking at the exact psychological anatomy of a man who has just executed his own soul. This is the story of Prince Llywelyn and the permanent cost of a temporary madness. To understand the weight hanging in this room, we have to look at the moments before the canvas was painted. According to ancient Welsh legend, Prince Llywelyn returned to his castle from a long, exhausting hunt. He had left his most prized possession behind, his infant son, under the sole protection of his fiercely loyal wolfhound, Gelert. But as the prince stepped across the threshold into the nursery, his heart stopped. The room was turned upside down. The cradle was flipped over, the sheets were torn apart, and there was an eerie, suffocating silence hanging in the air. And then, out of the shadows, walked Gelert. The hound ran to greet his master, tail wagging, expecting praise. But the prince looked down and saw that the dog's jaws, coat, and paws were covered in fresh, wet blood. In that instant, a horrific narrative flashed through Llywelyn's mind. He didn't see his loyal companion. His mind, blinded by panic and raw adrenaline, twisted the dog into a treacherous monster. He believed his child had been brutally devoured by the very beast he trusted. Without hesitation, without searching for proof, and without giving the animal a single second to explain, the prince gave in to a surge of pure, unchecked vengeance. He drew his heavy steel sword and drove it deep into the chest of his best friend. The dog let out a sharp, agonizing yelp, a sound of profound confusion and betrayal. It was the sound of a protector being destroyed by the very person he spent his life defending. But right as the metallic ring of the sword faded, a tiny, fragile sound cut through the silence of the room. A baby's cry. Trembling, the prince rushed to the overturned cradle and pulled back the heavy blue blankets on the floor. There, completely unharmed, lay his infant son. And right next to the child, hidden in the shadows, was the massive, mangled corpse of a savage wild wolf. Gelert hadn't broken his vow. He had fought a desperate, bloody battle to the death against a predator to keep the prince's bloodline alive. The blood on his fur wasn't the child's, it was the wolf's. Look back at the dying dog's eyes in Gourlay Steell's rendering. Even in his final fading breath, there is no malice or anger in his gaze. There is only a crushing, silent loyalty. The prince had sought justice, but in his impatient fury, he created an irreversible tragedy. The legend says that Llywelyn buried his hound with full royal honors, but the guilt was a prison he could never escape. From that day forward, he hung up his sword, and he never smiled again. Gourlay Steell didn't paint this to entertain us with an old legend. Like all great art, it is a mirror held up to our own nature. It forces us to ask ourselves, how often do we draw our own emotional swords in a moment of assumptions? How many relationships, friendships, and loyal souls do we destroy because we react to the blood on the surface, without looking for the wolf in the shadows? The next time you feel the heat of blind anger rising, remember Gelert. Because once the blade falls, even an eternity of tears cannot undo a single second of madness.